Now, a little context here. Revelation is a book that falls under the genre of apocalyptic literature. It's really the only book in the New Testament that fits pretty squarely into that category. It was written by the Apostle John, the disciple of Jesus. John, the brother of James, the son of Zebedee, who was the only apostle of Jesus, as far as we know. He's the only one of the 12 to die of natural causes, who lived to be an old man. And he wrote this revelation that he received from Jesus Christ when he was in prison on the island of Patmos. Now, he died of natural causes, but he endured a great amount of suffering for the name of Jesus Christ and for the kingdom. We have records from church history of John not only being imprisoned, but whipped, beaten, boiled alive, and then he didn't die, of all sorts of things that he went through. But most scholars believe that he wrote this when he was an old man in the 90s AD. So at the very end of the first century, years after 70 AD, when the Jerusalem temple was destroyed. Why does that matter, and why is that important? It must be said, for starters, that there are 4 different ways that Revelation has been interpreted throughout church history. And I'm going to briefly tell you about them, so that I can answer this question in a way that I feel is faithful, okay? Because there's different opinions on almost everything in Revelation. So there's the historicist view, there's the preterist view, there's the futurist view, and there's the idealist view of Revelation. Those are the 4 ways that Revelation has been interpreted throughout church history. In various times, different ways of interpreting Revelation have become more popular, and at other times, others. In today's world, in modern Protestant evangelicalism, the most popular way of interpreting Revelation is the futurist interpretation, where most people will tell you that most everything that happens in Revelation happens in the future, and it hasn't happened yet. I agree with that in some ways, but I actually believe that the right way to understand Revelation is to understand the futurist view, the preterist view, and the idealist view all at once. The historicist view, I personally don't really agree with. I don't think it makes much sense. I think that it's an idea that someone came up with that seemed to stick, but there's no other place in the Bible that we would ever even think to interpret like people interpret Revelation using the historicist view. So the historicist view basically interprets Revelation as if it were a map of church history. So it is basically a series of events that take place chronologically in between Christ's first and second coming. And depending on where you're at in the book, you're in some specific time in history between the first and second comings. So the historicist view believes that all of the 7 churches that are listed in the beginning of the book in chapters 2 and 3, in 2 out of the first 3 chapters, represent periods of time in church history. Now, I don't think that that's true, because I don't think there's anything in the text that clues us into that or gives us an impression or a reason to believe that. And the big problem with the historicist view is it seems to be a moving target, right? Everybody always seems to think that they're at the tail end of it, and then they have to go back in history and sort of realign all the different periods of time and say, well, this is this seal, and this is this bowl of wrath, and this is this trumpet. But it's always changing, that particular hermeneutic, and I don't really agree with it. By the way, if you want a great resource for Revelation and you want to understand the ways that it's been classically interpreted, there's a book by a friend of the program, Steve Gregg, who wrote a commentary called Revelation 4 Views. And it's in my library. It's on my shelf. I find it to be a helpful resource, definitely. And I think it's really helpful for people who have never really waded into these waters before. Now, the preterist view of Revelation reads Revelation as if most everything in it has already taken place. And for full preterists, they believe that everything has taken place, including the second coming of Jesus, which I do not agree with. And most people in the church do not agree with that. Are there strengths to the preterist view of Revelation? Absolutely. I believe that every book in the Bible has a specific application that was meant for the original audience. Okay? This is why I don't think the futurist view can be taken on its own when it comes to Revelation and said, well, this is all about stuff that hasn't really taken place yet. Because if that's true, and remember, Revelation is addressed to 7 churches that existed in the first century, meaning that when this was first written by John, there was an intended audience of real people in real churches who existed. And it said, Jesus tells John, write this and send it to the churches. This is for them. Now, if everything in the book has yet to take place and it's all for the future, why would Jesus tell John to send it to the 7 churches in Asia Minor who it's addressed to? If there's absolutely zero application for them and it has absolutely no bearing on their life, there's no immediate context or interpretation for them, why would he do that? That's why I don't believe in a full futurist view, but I also don't believe in a full preterist view, because I don't believe that everything in the book has taken place. I believe it's somewhere in the middle. And I also believe in the idealist view, which is the 4th one, which depicts Revelation more or less as a great drama that is depicting spiritual realities. That's depicting something, it's depicting events that will happen over and over again in church history. They happened in the first century and they'll happen again. And they're not meant to just be about one specific thing, or maybe they are, but they also apply to all sorts of other events that take place that will look like the original events, right? So in the original story, we've got a great empire that comes together with other empires that are represented by this beast that comes out of the ocean, and he wants to dominate. He wants to have total power and total control over people. And what he does is suppress and persecute and martyr the people of God. Y'all, that spoke loudly and clearly to the original audience because they were living under Roman persecution. You know who else it speaks loudly and clearly to? The church in North Korea today. The church in India today. The church in Cambodia and Sri Lanka. The church more and more, once again, in communist China. It doesn't really speak that loudly to us in America yet, but it very, very much does speak loudly to churches in other parts of the world that are persecuted, that are much more persecuted than we are. So I believe that a correct understanding of Revelation takes the preterist view, the futurist view, and the idealist view all into account. If I had to choose one, it would be a mix between, well, if I had to choose one, it would be idealist. But ideally, I take all 3 views into account. Thanks for watching. My name is Blake, and over the past 20 years, I've been a missionary, a pastor, and a Bible college and seminary professor. During that entire time, I've been teaching the Bible. And if you want more Bible content to come your way, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video. And also, check out this video right here.